She once calculated flight paths for satellites, but no one could calculate why she vanished on a trail she knew like the back of her hand. Leona James was a brilliant engineer, a devoted single mother, and one of the rare points of pride for the Black community in Anchorage. Alaska. She wasn't an athlete. She never chased fame, but there was one place she returned to every year: the Kenai Mountains, where the mist never fully clears and the silence can make you hear the strangest echoes from deep inside yourself. On a summer morning in 2012, Leona texted her mother heading out for a short hike. "It'll be back in time for dinner." She threw on her moss green jacket, laced up her familiar hiking boots, and stepped out of her small log cabin south of Anchorage. She left a note for her 9-year-old daughter, not a goodbye, just a promise: Malia, "It'll be back soon. Love you." 48 hours later. A frantic search began. Her backpack was found near the edge of a slope, dry, neatly packed inside. Her map was untouched except for one torn corner, where a handwritten note read, "Turn NW after Rockbridge. No one has seen Leona since. No cameras, no witnesses, no messages." A woman who once guided equipment in space had vanished without a trace, just 40 minutes from the city, and then 11 years later. A stranger called the police, her voice trembling. I think I've met that woman, but she doesn't know who she is. What follows isn't just a story about a missing person. It's about the things no one notices: the gaps in memory, in records, in the heart that might hold a truth science can't explain. Leona James was born on a bone-chilling winter morning in Anchorage, Alaska, in the quiet neighborhood of Fairview. Not many people knew her name at the time, but neighbors still remember a little girl with bright eyes, often sitting silently on the porch, watching snowfall. Never once complaining about the cold. Her family didn't have much. Her mother worked night shifts as a nurse at the local hospital, and her father was a power line technician, a quiet man who came home each evening with oil-stained hands and the smell of cold wind clinging to his coat. But their happiness was simple, wrapped in late dinners, the hum of the radio, and fairy tales Leona read by the soft light of her bedside lamp. Everything changed when Leona turned 8. A tragic electrical accident took her father's life. From then on, her mother held everything together without complaint, without tears in front of her daughter. Leona learned from her the strength of silent endurance and something else: that love doesn't always need words. She excelled in school, worked hard, often borrowing advanced math books from the city library and returning them within days. By 6th grade, she had built a working radio from a discounted science kit. Her teachers were amazed, but what Leona remembers most was the quiet pride in her mother's eyes. In high school, she was the only Black student in the advanced math track. One day during a test, the teacher accidentally handed her exam to another student, assuming Leona couldn't possibly have solved the complex equations. She didn't protest. She just waited for the teacher to realize the mistake. From that day on, the way people looked at her changed, not with pity or doubt, but with respect. Leona never sought attention, but she knew she had to be better, just to be seen as equal. In 12th grade, she won first place in the state weather sensor design competition. The prize wasn't grand, a summer research scholarship at the University of Alaska, but it was the first door she opened entirely on her own. The day she got the news, her mother hugged her tightly in their small kitchen, the smell of old coffee still in the air. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. Leona just smiled, but behind her straight back, her heart trembled with hope. She knew she wasn't just learning for a job, she was learning to push past every limit others had ever put on her. The University of Alaska wasn't a top-tier school by national standards, but for Leona, it was a real chance. She chose aerospace engineering, a field many still thought was too complicated for women, and especially for women of color from working-class backgrounds. She studied day and night, no clubs, no parties. She wrote code in the lab while her classmates went to movies, and interned during breaks when others went home. Not because she didn't enjoy fun, but because she knew her path left no room for error. After graduation, she was hired by NASA's Polar Atmospheric Research Division, a lesser-known branch, but crucial in monitoring magnetic field shifts and solar energy impact at the North Pole. She was one of only 2 Black engineers at the center, and the only one with a native Alaskan accent. At first, no one noticed her, but within a year, she was leading a magnetic field project in the Kenai region, thanks to her precision, calm demeanor, and unmatched data analysis skills. At 29, Leona became a mother. Malia was unexpected, but never unwanted. Leona rarely spoke about Malia's father. He was no longer in their lives, but she never let her daughter feel unloved. They lived in a modest apartment overlooking a frozen lake, where evenings were spent with Malia doing homework, while her mother fixed instruments at the kitchen table. Leona told her stories about stars, wind, and electromagnetic waves to Malia. Her mother wasn't just a provider, she was someone who could hear the earth speak. Leona worked full-time, yet gave Malia a rich, steady world every weekend. They went to the city library, read under the tall spruce trees, or picnicked near the Kenai forest. Leona didn't raise her daughter with lectures. She taught by example, fastening every buckle on their hiking packs with care, smiling patiently when Malia asked, "What's a magnetic field?" and answering without pause, more than anything. She let her daughter see women, especially women like them, could do anything, even measure the invisible energy of the sky. Leona didn't come to Kenai as a climber, but as someone seeking stillness. She once told a colleague, "In the lab, I analyze magnetic shifts on the mountain. I feel them, for many." That sounded poetic. For Leona, it was simply a different way of being. She believed some things couldn't be measured by instruments, only felt through quiet and a deep connection to nature. She hiked Kenai nearly 10 times, always alone, each time. She wrote in her notebook, not technical data, just feelings. The wind changed direction, as if it knew I was coming. Or, the echo today was strange when I tapped a rock on the ground. To outsiders, it sounded whimsical, but to Leona, a scientist who worked from emotion, it was her own kind of data. She never explained why she loved Kenai so much. Some said it was where her father once took her camping. Others thought she liked the escape a break from invisible pressures. But there was one thing she didn't mention, right before she disappeared. She took time off work to investigate magnetic anomalies at Kenai coordinates. No one at NASA noticed Leona often did field work alone, but when the case was reopened, that note became a critical clue. The last thing she left behind wasn't a warning. Not a farewell, just a handwritten note on a torn map. Turn NW after Rockbridge, a direction, a warning, or something only she understood. No one knows for sure, but everyone agrees Leona didn't vanish by accident. Maybe. She was following a signal, a call that no one else could hear. Sunday morning, August the 12th, 2012, Anchorage woke to a rare, cloudless sky. Leona was up earlier than usual, making breakfast for Malia toast, eggs, and strawberries. She kissed her daughter's forehead and told her mother, "I'll only be gone half the day. She has math homework this afternoon, in the soft light of an Alaskan summer morning." Leona put on her familiar moss green jacket, packed a light backpack, and took a marked map. She drove over an hour to the trailhead on the southern edge of the Kenai Range, parking in a grassy patch near an old ranger station. A nearby gas station attendant remembered her stopping by to buy a bottle of water and ask about the weather forecast. She smiled and said she just needed a bit of silence to recharge. Nothing seemed unusual except for one thing: she didn't bring her phone. That detail puzzled her family. Leona always brought her phone on hikes, not for pictures, but for data logging, GPS, and emergencies, she once said. Nothing replaces instinct, but caution is just part of being an engineer. So why was this time different? No one had an answer. That evening, Leona didn't return as planned. At first, her mother thought maybe she was delayed by weather, but as night fell and rain began, and little Malia asked, "Where's Mommy?" worry filled Nadine's eyes. By morning, they called the police. A search team was mobilized within 12 hours. There were no signals from Leona's phone or GPS, and no one knew exactly which trail she'd taken. Some friends guessed she might have been scouting around High Bluff, a spot where she'd once mentioned measuring magnetic anomalies. But there were no official notes about such a plan. Leona had gone alone as always, but this time, she hadn't left a path back. Then, on the second day of the search, something startling was found: Leona's backpack, near the edge of a Kenai slope, dry, neatly placed, no signs of a fall or struggle, inside uneaten snacks, a small notebook, and a torn map with one remaining corner showing a handwritten note, "Turn NW after Rockbridge." No one could make sense of it. There was no known ravine nearby, and no recorded stone bridge in the area. So where was Leona going? And more importantly, why leave the pack? But not a single message after the backpack was found. The case shifted from possibly missing to a full emergency. The Kenai terrain wasn't especially dangerous for an experienced hiker like Leona, but Alaskan weather was always a wild card. Sudden fog could erase trails in minutes. Still, what puzzled the search team wasn't the weather, it was the complete absence of any other trace. No skid marks, no drag trails, no dropped items along the path. But about 60 meters from the backpack, one strange detail stood out: a pair of gloves, folded neatly on a flat rock. No dirt, no tears. The kind Leona always used insulated fibers, designed for field geomagnetic readings. Why would she take them off in the cold and fold them as if she knew she wasn't coming back? Authorities expanded the search zone, deploying drones and thermal cameras. Nothing. A week passed, no body, no blood, no clues except for that torn map and those folded gloves. Even her car parked at the ranger station remained untouched. Doors locked, gas tank still half full. The press kept the coverage low-key to avoid panic. NASA engineer missing during solo hike, read one headline. But within the local science community, the case sent shockwaves. Leona wasn't careless. "Shed once tracked solar storms to the minute," one colleague said. "If Leona left her backpack behind, she had a reason, but that reason doesn't follow normal logic." A week later, a ranger stumbled on something unusual nearly 3 miles north of the search area: a small, specialized magnetic sensor, the kind only researchers like Leona would use. It was damaged, the battery removed, the wiring abruptly disconnected. It hadn't been in her backpack, but everyone knew she was the only one in the region who carried one like it. The question wasn't just where Leona had gone, but why that device was found miles from her starting point, off-trail, in a place no one had reason to visit unless they meant to. And why had no one known she brought it for a long time? There were no answers. But the feeling was clear. Something wasn't right. Weeks after the official search ended, Leona's family kept reaching out to locals around Kenai, hoping someone had seen something, anything. They couldn't accept that Leona, who planned everything, who always told her daughter never to enter the forest without leaving a route, could disappear without a single trace. And slowly, from scattered conversations, strange details began to surface. A power line worker living on the eastern edge of the forest recalled hearing a sound on the night of August 13th, just one day after Leona vanished. It was like metal hitting rock. He said, "Came from up north, where there aren't any stations or lines." He assumed it was a rock slide, but then added, "The sound repeated 3 times, evenly spaced, like someone was trying to do something. He didn't report it, thought it wasn't important." Someone else, the woman who ran the old gas station near the trailhead, said that a week before Leona disappeared, a black SUV with unfamiliar plates had been parked overnight several times near the rest stop. A man drove it. No one knew who he was. After Leona vanished, the car never returned. There was no direct link, but the timing left her uneasy. Every detail, no matter how small, was documented by Leona's family. Her mother, Nadine, kept a notebook logging every search hour, every lead, every vague memory. In one entry, she wrote, "If my daughter didn't get lost, then who pulled her off the map she drew? Not a question about geography, but about fate, 1 week before Malaya's birthday." Nadine reopened the map. Police had returned the torn one, and for the first time, noticed something: the handwriting on the edge didn't look like Leonas. That same year, the local weather center quietly released an overlooked internal report on the afternoon of August 12th, right around the time Leona is believed to have entered the forest. A brief magnetic anomaly was recorded near the Kenai coordinates, a subtle shift in the magnetic field, lasting 42 minutes, not large enough to trigger alerts, not clear enough to analyze, but also never recorded before within a 20-mile radius. No one could say for sure it was connected. But to those who believed in details, to those who knew Leona, it couldn't be coincidence. Maybe she sensed it coming. Maybe that was the signal she was following. But if so, what waited for her beyond that imagined stone bridge, and why was she the only one who heard the call? When the official investigation closed with the conclusion missing under undefined natural circumstances, Leona's family felt something had been overlooked. It wasn't that they doubted the search teams. They knew those who had trekked through snow, forest, and rock were dedicated professionals. The problem wasn't in the journey, but in the premise. Leona wasn't someone who entered the woods without telling anyone. She wasn't someone who left behind damaged instruments or abandoned a backpack mid-slope. She once wrote, "Equipment is my only companion on the mountain." So, if the backpack was there, the gloves were there, and the sensor was found dismantled miles away, what forced her to separate from them all? What was she following, or who was she running from? Her mother, Nadine, began combing through every note, message, and document Leona had left behind. One small thing gnawed at her. Leona had always logged her trips in detail on her tablet, in notebooks, sometimes even printing plans to share with colleagues for data collection. But this time, there was nothing. No emails, no logs, no itinerary. As if the entire trip had been planned off the grid. A former colleague at the research center remembered a meeting 2 weeks before Leona vanished. When asked about her latest readings in Kenai, she replied that there were a few anomalies, but nothing significant. Her tone, according to one senior engineer, was eerily calm. After the meeting, he saw her staring at the wall map, not at the marked data points, but at a blank area with no annotations. It was like she was reading a language only she understood. He said, "Another odd detail a week before she left. A package arrived at Leona's house, no return name. Only a postal address from Southwest Oregon. Inside was an old-style map roll, printed on the kind of paper used in geological studies from the 1980s. No one knew who sent it. Leona never mentioned it to her mother or daughter when the house was searched. The map wasn't in her file cabinet. But Malia remembered her mom folded something that looked like a map and slipped it into her pack the day before she left. None of these things were concrete evidence, but together, they formed a troubling question. Was Leona chasing something that had nothing to do with work, nothing to do with science, and that she chose not to share with anyone? And if so, why? In 2015, 3 years after Leona disappeared, Nadine received a letter, no sender, no return address, just a single line printed in even, typewritten font on plain white paper. "If you truly want to know where Leona went, don't look underground." The letter was unsigned, no identifying marks. She turned it over to the police. They tested for fingerprints, nothing. No DNA, no special ink, no saliva, just a cold piece of paper and a chill even colder that ran through a mother's spine. Soon after, she tracked down the Inupiaq electrician, the man who said he'd heard the metallic sound from the Kenai forest on the day Leona went missing. They sat in the old rest stop near the mountain's edge, sipping hot black coffee, gazing out at the trail. He recalled that sound. It wasn't a rock slide. It hit 3 times, even, deliberate, like someone was locking something or unlocking it. He also mentioned something he once dismissed about half an hour after the sound. He saw a man in a black coat standing between 2 large spruce trees. No backpack, not hiking, just standing there. When he blinked, the man was gone, vanished behind the trees. He thought it was a trick of the light until he heard about the disappearance. No one could confirm the man's presence. No photo, no license plate, no trace. But when the search team returned with ground-penetrating radar, they detected a shallow cavity, a dome-shaped depression about 1.5 meters below the surface, covered by natural rock. No one could say whether it was a man-made structure or just erosion. No one dared break through. There was no legal basis to dig. But that detail, combined with the metal sounds, the black-coated man, and the anonymous letter, changed the narrative from a disappearance to something far more complicated. In 2011, a year before she vanished, Leona had been a guest speaker at a high school science seminar. She stood before an auditorium full of students, mostly youth of color from underfunded districts, and spoke on the topic, listening to the voice of the earth. One of the students there was Malik 16 Black, raised by his grandmother, and had never met anyone who worked for NASA. After the talk, He approached Leona and asked, "Do you think the vibrations in the earth can record human memory?" Leona paused for a few seconds, then said something Malik never forgot, if we're patient enough, and quiet enough, maybe everything leaves a trace. 4 years later. Malik, now a physics student, stumbled upon a forgotten blog post by a former engineer who had worked with Leona. In it, the writer mentioned Leona had once tested an unpublished geomagnetic sensor designed not to read the environment, but to listen to a moment in time. No one knew why she built it, and it was never mentioned again. Malik remembered her words and began to suspect that what Leona was chasing wasn't just science. He wrote a letter to her family, sharing the memory. Nadine read it, cried, and quietly wrote in her own notebook, "If you truly heard the earth, I hope you know, I'm still calling your name every day." The perspective of a boy who once saw her as a hero, now a student, walking in her scientific footsteps, made the picture even more layered. Leona didn't vanish in an accident. She wasn't kidnapped. Maybe she stepped out of this world on her own to chase something no one else dared name. 11 years after Leona James vanished. In the fall of 2023, an unexpected call came into the Anchorage Police Department. The caller was a woman named Nadine Everett, recently relocated to Alaska from Oregon. Her voice was soft, trembling, but calm enough to recount a strange experience she'd had just 3 days earlier. Nadine had gone solo camping on the southern edge of the Kenai forest, an area rarely visited, lying well outside the main trail network. Around 6 p.m., as the sun dipped below the thinning treetops, she heard footsteps on the damp forest floor, thinking it might be a lost hiker or wild animal. She reached for her safety whistle, but what emerged from the brush stopped her cold. A woman about 57, thin, wearing an old, thick green jacket. Her long black hair was slightly tangled. Her eyes were wide but empty, as if they weren't focused on anything at all. She didn't look dangerous, but she didn't look like someone out camping either. No pack, no gear. She stood about 30 feet away and asked, slowly, "What year is it, Nadine?" Assuming the woman might be injured or disoriented, took a cautious step forward and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman stepped back. She didn't answer. She simply repeated the question, slightly off key. "What year is it?" Nadine said. What shook her wasn't the question, but how it was asked. Not like someone seeking information, but like someone checking whether reality still matched what she remembered. And when Nadine stepped closer, the woman turned and quickly disappeared into the woods. She didn't look back. No clear footprints, no trail to follow, still rattled. Nadine returned to Anchorage, at a local grocery store. She passed a missing persons board, among the faces posted there. One photo stopped her cold Leona James. She couldn't believe it. The woman she saw, that gaze, that voice, that jacket, was an almost perfect match. Not sure anyone would believe her, Nadine called the police anyway. "I can't say for certain." She said, "But if that was the woman in the photo, something's wrong, because she hasn't aged." And that impossible detail, as unbelievable as it sounded, became the first flicker of light in 11 years of darkness. As soon as Nadine Everett's report came in, authorities, along with a volunteer search team, launched a sweep of the area she described. The location was far beyond the original 2012 search radius outside main trails. Dense and disorienting terrain for anyone without GPS. This time, they brought modern tech drones, infrared cameras, motion sensors. They didn't find Leona, but about 800 meters from Nadine's campsite, in a clearing surrounded by 3 tall pine trees, they discovered an old fire pit. The ashes were cold, but not ancient signs it had been used not long ago. More curiously, beside the ashes sat an old soda can, a discontinued brand from 2011, clean, ungrusted, placed carefully atop a flat stone. No signs of living space, no tent, no tools, no tracks. But motion sensors later picked up 2 slight thermal disturbances during the night, like a human-sized presence entering, then vanishing within minutes. No clear image, no sound, just a presence, one analyst whispered, off the record. "If someone's been out here for 11 years and left no trace, they're not exactly human anymore." It wasn't in the official report, but it captured what many in the search team were beginning to feel. And then the questions no one wanted to ask began to rise. If that really was Leona, how is she still alive? Why hasn't she aged? And if it was her, why hasn't she called for help? Why hasn't she come home? Why didn't she respond when someone called her name? When Nadine Everett's voice recording was played for Leona's mother, Nadine James, she broke down. Not because she recognized the voice, but because something in her shattered. It sounds like Leona, but it's not her anymore. In that moment, she understood if her daughter still existed, the part of her that had once been a daughter, a mother. A scientist might have been stripped away long ago. Ian Madsen was one of the last colleagues to work with Leona at the Atmospheric Research Center. At a scientific conference in 2024, 12 years to the day since she vanished, he stood at the podium, quietly opened a worn folder, and said, "There are things we can't explain with data. That doesn't mean they don't exist." He recalled that. A month before Leona disappeared, she walked into his office, placed a hard drive on his desk, and said, "If I don't come back, send this to Malia when she turns 18. At the time, Ian thought she was preparing for a field trip after she vanished. He kept his promise, never opened the drive. Out of respect, Malia is now 21. The little girl who once listened to stories about magnetic fields by the kitchen table is now studying geophysics. When Ian reached out and gave her the drive, she wasn't surprised. Mom always prepared for things no one else expected. She said, the hard drive contained no personal notes, just hundreds of logs, geomagnetic readings collected over 3 years, all focused on a single location, Kenai. One segment was encrypted when Malia decoded it. It revealed a waveform like a brainwave, but not from the Earth. It mirrored a human heartbeat. The file was named Echo 2012. Leona Final Science couldn't say what it was. But to Malia, it was a message, one last signal, buried in a sea of interference. And to her, as Leona once said, if you're quiet enough, if you're patient enough, everything leaves a trace, even love, even a woman who walked out of the world as we know it. When the contents of the hard drive were finally made public, they didn't bring closure, they unraveled every theory that had once seemed logical. What people thought were the obvious answers: accident, getting lost signal no longer held weight. Leona hadn't just gone on an ordinary hike. She had prepared thoroughly, with purpose. She'd even left behind her data, arranged like a legacy. And if she had truly entered Kenai chasing a signal, then what had kept her there? A natural phenomenon, a psychological break, or a state we don't yet have language to name at this point. The media began to fracture. Some claimed she'd experienced a mental health crisis and chosen to live off the grid without identity. But that theory couldn't explain how she survived 11 years in such harsh terrain without leaving any trace. Others leaned toward darker speculation, surveillance, secret experiments, even classified projects, but there was no evidence for any of it. Even the man in the black coat, once mentioned by a witness, was never found. Even Nadine Everett, the woman who claimed to see the strange woman in the forest, began to question her memory weeks later. At the time, I was sure. She said, "But the more I think back, it feels like something does want me to remember. She hadn't been injured, wasn't on any medication. Yet the memory, that moment of staring into hollow eyes, hung in her mind like a dream, halfway between waking and sleep." Leona's family, meanwhile, remained more silent than ever. Malia refused interviews. She released only one short letter. "I don't believe my mother disappeared. I believe she chose a path, and only she knew what to call it." Former colleagues stopped speculating. One senior scientist who once rejected all mystical interpretations now simply said, "There are vibrations our instruments can't reach. Maybe Leona reached them first." A quiet consensus began to form, though few would say it aloud. Leona's disappearance might not be solvable with traditional tools. And the most frightening possibility wasn't that she was lost. It was that she was still out there somewhere, looking back at this world as if it no longer belonged to her. In spring 2025, a group of university students held a seminar in Anchorage titled "The Trace of Leona Between Science and Memory." More than 300 people attended, not because they were experts, but because so many had known Leona as a colleague, a classmate, or simply a familiar face in their city. What people shared wasn't evidence, but emotion. An older woman stood and said, "In 2013, I thought I saw her crossing the street near the clinic. I figured I was imagining things." A young man recalled a 2016 camping trip where he saw someone waving from the tree line. When he turned to look again, no one was there. Stories once dismissed were now remembered not as proof, but as pieces, as if everyone was slowly gathering the fragments of something long scattered from the seminar. One new clue drew interest, the old-style paper map that Leona's family believed she received just before she vanished. A cartography professor in attendance noted that if it truly dated from the 1980s, that type of print was often used in civilian military research projects, especially in zones with magnetic interference, which he didn't claim it was a secret map, but he did say if she had one of those, it didn't come from a retail store. That raised new questions. Could Leona have once been approached or invited to join a sensitive research effort? Did she refuse to share her findings out of concern or caution? Maybe she felt she had to observe it herself without interference. And if so, maybe what she found made her choose not to return. Not because someone stopped her, but because she no longer saw this world as hers to return to. The most painful question, and the hardest to answer, was this. Why would a woman with every reason to live a daughter, a mother, a career, a community, choose silence? Maybe some experiences, once crossed, make words unnecessary. Maybe, in her final moment in Kenai, Leona understood something the rest of us are not ready to know. Outside the Atmospheric Research Center in southern Anchorage, a small wooden plaque was placed in May 2025. It reads, "In quiet patterns." She listened, and in silence. She stayed. No name, no description. But those who knew Leona understand it was meant for her, since that seminar. People around Kenai began to see the mountain differently. They no longer called it the disappearance of Leona James. They called it the Kenai journey. The change wasn't in facts, it was in attitude. From a need to explain to an ability to accept. Malia, now a graduate, often returns to the overlook near the edge of the forest. She brings no instruments, just sits, staring into the endless green where her mother once vanished and now, where she connects with some part of her still present. If she's still out there, Malia said in a rare interview, I believe she's keeping her promise, not coming back, but never really gone. Maybe Leona's story isn't about someone who disappeared. Maybe it's about someone who went too deep into herself, into the unknown, and couldn't return by the same path. And maybe what she left behind wasn't footprints, but a new model of how we exist quietly, deeply, beyond proof. In that final moment when Nadine Everett last saw her near the forest's edge, she recalled hearing the woman say, "I'm still here, just in a different place." Maybe it was a metaphor. Maybe it was literal. Either way, it forever changed how people who once knew Leona see the world. No more black and white, no more gone or found. Only a ripple in the field, quiet, but never fading. No one calls it a disappearance anymore, but the shadow Leona left behind stretches on like a faint line across the map of everyone she ever touched to Alaska's scientific community. Leona remains an unanswered question, not because they deny what happened, but because no one wants to end her story with a period. The conclusion is simple. She went into the forest and didn't return. But if the truth stops there, it betrays everything Leona lived for. Perhaps what haunts people most isn't that Leona was never found, but the sense that she found something and couldn't bring it back. Some call it an awakening beyond science. Others call it the point of no return. But whatever it was, it left everyone wondering if Leona, a serious engineer, a devoted mother, a cautious thinker, chose to walk away from everything she once held dear. Then the place she chose to go might be somewhere the rest of us aren't ready to follow. The grief doesn't come from loss, but from the aching sense that we didn't understand her in time, that we lost her not to the forest, but to a language she no longer spoke with us. Nadine, Leona's mother, now in her 70s, no longer hopes to see her daughter walk through the door on her bedside table. She keeps a small framed photo, not of grown-up Leona, but of the little girl sitting beside the homemade radio she built in 6th grade. That's when she started hearing things the rest of us couldn't. Nadine whispered in her final interview, I just didn't know how far she would go. At the overlook near Kenai, Malia is sometimes seen alone, silent. She brings no gear, takes no notes, just sits, as if holding space for a reunion that needs no words. Once, someone asked if she believed her mother was still alive. Malia smiled. "Some things don't live," she said, "but they don't die either. They just remain. And sometimes, that's enough, in a world that demands every story have an ending." Leona's silence is a quiet refusal, not resistance, not rebellion, just a choice to step out of the current to become a small, separate stream flowing toward a place only she could name. But even that stream, no matter how quiet, leaves a ripple in the hearts of those who once heard it and believed. So what really happened to Leona James? Was she lost drawn into something beyond understanding? Or through her own will did she walk out of our world, into another, where nothing needed proving and no words were required? What does it take for someone to leave everything behind, not out of despair, but because their belief in something greater was enough to give up their very presence? Have you ever felt there's a place deep in the forest, or deep within yourself, where you hear a sound so small, but so unforgettable? And if so, would you dare to follow it? Leona may have vanished from this world, but her story and what she left behind lives on in those still asking questions, in those still willing to listen, and in those who have loved someone but couldn't hold them back with logic alone. If you've ever known someone like Leona, quiet, thoughtful, and one day simply gone, leave a word. Comment "me too" if someone has faded from your life. Not because they forgot you, but because they were hearing something beyond the usual call. And if you're hearing that call right now, please know you are not alone.